The leaders who work hardest to control their emotions are often the ones doing the most damage, not because they're bad leaders, but because they're suppressing something that can't be controlled, and everyone around them can feel it. If you pride yourself on being calm, rational, and unshakable under pressure, this video may make you uncomfortable, because what most leaders call emotional maturity is actually emotional suppression. And suppression quietly destroys trust, performance, and relationships long before it ever looks like a problem. I've worked with CEOs who never raised their voice, never lost their cool, and yet entire teams walked on eggshells around them, not because of what was said, but because of what was being held in. In this video, I'm going to show you why trying to control your emotions doesn't work, the two paths most leaders take under pressure, and the third path almost nobody takes, which changes leadership from the inside out. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Paul is the owner of a tech company that I managed for a few months to turn it around and resolve some serious problems that were running it into the ground. Paul never raised his voice, was never rude or unpleasant, at least to me, and I never once saw him lose his temper. But I could feel the raging ball of anger burning inside him that he worked tirelessly to suppress. Everybody else could feel it too, and did their best to avoid him. I've met many leaders like Paul, high achievers who, through the power of their intellect and ambition, build great businesses, often from scratch. But what they frequently fail to do is to up-level themselves so that they can meet the inevitable challenges that the business will throw at them. These are not intellectual challenges that can be thought through and resolved logically. They're the easy ones. I'm talking about how you deal with a director who's failing at their job, or the conflicts of interest between work and family time, the feeling of complete isolation, loneliness even, of being a CEO, or the unrelenting pressure to perform, to drive results, and to succeed. In Paul's case, it was the frustration of having to deal with people around him that he deemed less capable than himself. He saw his colleagues as morons and their behavior as idiotic. It infuriated him to the point where he could no longer lead the company and instead asked me to do it for him. So what do you do when you are experiencing intense negative emotion in a professional environment, for whatever reason? I'm going to set out the two diametrically opposed paths nearly everyone takes and the consequences of each. Then I'll present you with a third path, the one that so few choose, and the only one that changes the entire game of leadership from the inside out. Okay, so number one is the path of suppression. This is the deliberate stifling of emotion in the hope that it will just evaporate and go away. Many of us learned it as children, being told that big boys don't cry, or put your big girl pants on. So we practiced masking emotion by forcing ourselves to stay calm on the outside, whilst all hell was breaking loose on the inside. The chasm between how you were feeling and how you tried to behave just made the whole experience even more painful. We can call it toxic stoicism. This was Paul's chosen modus operandi. He would expect people to disappoint him, which they inevitably would, perhaps as a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then react internally with such intense anger and frustration, creating a pressure cooker of emotion with no safety valve. Let's explore three reasons why this approach is doomed to failure before we look at the alternatives. Number one, however much you try to hide emotion, it will always get picked up by others to some extent. You can be quite sure that some inadvertent body language, your choice of words, tone of voice, or simply a look will betray what you are feeling but trying to disguise. In Paul's case, it was the refusal to make eye contact that told me he was deeply upset with someone or something. Secondly, this kind of intense emotion disables your capacity to think clearly and rationally. It promotes reactive decisions over considered responses, precisely the opposite of what good leadership needs. And finally, it drains your energy, corrodes your relationships, and undermines your leadership performance all round. If left unchecked, it will compromise your mental and physical health and render you incapable of leading. I've witnessed this on a number of occasions where CEOs have lost the will to continue, sinking into depression and illness as a result. Hopefully, by now, you'll be aware that suppressing your emotions is not a healthy response to the stresses and strains of leadership. So let's now examine the opposite path, the path of expression, the polar opposite of suppression, before we go on to visit the third path. Expression is when the leader opts to signal to his team and his people exactly how they feel by externalizing their emotions freely and openly, almost on a moment-by-moment basis. I work closely with one such leader, Mike, the owner of a construction company, who would let people know exactly how he felt regardless of the circumstances. This wasn't exclusively negative. In fact, he could be great company when he was feeling good. The problems erupted when things didn't go his way, and he would explode in fits of rage, unable to control his tantrums. You can imagine the outcomes. Good employees would eventually hand in their notice, customers would not return, and those remaining would all have uneasy relationships with Mike, depending on his mood. We could also call this syndrome emotional incontinence. Mike was aware of what he was doing, but once it started, he was powerless to stop it. And this is where a fundamental law of psychology comes in, one that explains not just Mike's behavior, but why so much emotional advice fails. The law is simple. Thoughts create feelings. Mike exploded because the thinking running through his mind generated emotions so intense that any attempt at control was doomed to fail. The instinct to react openly overwhelmed him every time. And this is the critical point, because most emotional advice collapses right here. It focuses on controlling behavior or managing feelings, without understanding how either is created in the first place. Now, there are two more psychological laws that almost nobody understands, and once you see them, you'll understand why suppression and expression are just two sides of the same trap. I'll come back to Mike in a moment, but first, have you noticed that there is very little difference between Paul and Mike's behavior? Okay, so one is the toxic stoic, who stifles his emotions, whilst the other is emotionally incontinent and wears them on his sleeve. But the emotions and the consequences of them are almost identical. Both experience intense anger, both have strained relationships with staff and customers, both suffer from poor physical and mental health, and both fail spectacularly as leaders. There must be another way, and there is. I call this third way the way of discretion. Discretion is a good word to describe this, as not only does it mean the power of good judgment, it also means the freedom to choose and the ability to speak without offence, all three of which are core to good leadership. So now the question is, how do you shift from the opposing paths of suppression and expression to this third path of discretion? To really get to the bottom of this, we're going to need some very basic but little-known psychology, which I'll describe in simple terms. Then we'll look at some real-life examples before laying out a three-step process for elevating yourself out of the traps of suppression and expression and into that dimension of discretion. First off, we need to understand that the way we feel is a direct result of the way we think. This is the first law that I mentioned before. All thought generates feeling. So if I'm feeling frustrated, it will be because I'm thinking that I should have something that I don't. If I'm feeling angry, it will be because I'm thinking that someone has behaved badly towards me. And if I'm feeling hopeful, it will be because I'm thinking something good will happen soon. This is the first of three laws, which applies to all our feelings, no exceptions. I'll be explaining the other two shortly. So this first law explains why some people thrive in situations that others barely survive. The situation or event is the same, but the thinking and the felt experience is very different. It also explains why you got so frustrated in traffic yesterday when today the same traffic just didn't seem to matter to you at all. This knowledge of how your mind works provides one of the keys to mastering your emotional world. If feelings are caused by thoughts, then no amount of effort directed at suppressing or expressing those feelings is going to change them. unless the thinking behind them changes first. So the first breakthrough is the realization that emotional management comes from further up the chain of cause and effect. Trying to directly change your feelings is like switching the smoke detector off instead of putting out the fire. What's worse is that the more you try, the more chaotic your thinking will become, and the more unwanted emotions will be created. Is that familiar? Okay, so having established that the way you feel is purely down to the way you think, how do you change your thinking to feel better? At this point, we need to be aware of a second law of psychology, which is you cannot control your thoughts. Really? Doesn't that make us completely helpless? Surely if we can't control our thoughts, then how in heaven are we going to control the way we feel? Good question. Bear with me while I explain. Our brains are designed, amongst other things, to think. Just like our hearts are designed to pump and our lungs are designed to breathe. And just as you wouldn't try to interfere with the way your kidneys work or your liver functions, nor does your brain need your intervention in how it works. Thinking is what it does, what it's designed to do, and does a whole lot better than you could ever begin to do yourself. Which brings us to the third law of psychology: you are not your thoughts. Now, if you're thinking that this only makes things worse for you in trying to gain mastery over the way you feel, you couldn't be further from the truth. This is how it works. Although we are not our thoughts and we do not create them, we have complete discretion over which thoughts we pay attention to. This is the dimension of discretion which I mentioned earlier. When you stop trying to change your feelings and stop trying to interfere with your thinking, you become completely free to choose the thoughts you want to believe or make real for yourself. And because it's only those thoughts that you pay attention to which create the feelings you experience, this approach gives you complete mastery over your emotional world, without any need to wrestle with the thoughts and feelings themselves. From this perspective, there is no need to do anything at all. Simply choose the thoughts you want to give you the most pleasant emotional experience you can imagine. If you're now thinking that this is so simple, why doesn't everyone do it? The reason is that, however simple it may appear, that doesn't make it easy, particularly as we've spent most of our lives practicing the opposite. Our parents, teachers, and society tell us as children that the way we feel is the result of our circumstances. This is a dangerous lie, which, if we believe, turns us into victims of circumstance instead of the architects of them. In Mike's case, he drank to numb the pain of his behaviour and became physically quite unhealthy. He put it all down to the incompetence of the people around him. I managed to help him avert several disasters by working with him on his self-awareness, but he was the first to admit that he didn't really want to change, regardless of the consequences. The company eventually went into liquidation, and Mike retired. He continues to suffer very poor health. So what do we do if we really want to be free from the tyranny of unwanted emotion? Here is a 3-step formula to progressively liberate yourself from the world of emotional suppression or expression, of toxic stoicism and emotional incontinence that so many of us are victims of. It is deceptively simple, but don't let that fool you. It needs diligence and persistence and is a lifelong practice. But once you begin to experience the results, you'll wish you'd always done it. And then I'll signpost another practice that will accelerate and amplify the process, one that all masters of their emotions use. Here are the 3 steps. 1. Notice your thinking. 2. Allow your feeling. 3. Choose different thoughts. Let's look at these in more detail. With step number 1, the next time you're not feeling as you would like to feel, ask yourself what the thinking is behind the emotion. If you're feeling anxious, is it because you think your boss may be unhappy with your latest report? Is it because you think you may have upset your partner? Is it because you're currently spending more than you're earning and you'll run out of money? In a sense, it really doesn't matter what the thinking is as long as you've identified it. Step number 2 is to immerse yourself in the emotion and really feel it. Resist any urge to suppress or express it at this point. Instead, give it full rein, and experience it for a few moments. It's important to fully acknowledge the feelings that your thinking creates. They are there to indicate the quality of your thinking. Bathe in them. The final step, number 3, is to become aware that whatever the thinking is, it's just one of hundreds or thousands of possible thoughts you could have chosen to believe. This is why two people in the same situation can respond so differently. One will thrive, the other may fail to survive, only because of the thoughts they choose to believe. If you're worried about how your boss will react to your report, choose to believe that she will absolutely love it. Or if that's too much of a stretch, choose to believe that she won't react at all to it. Be pragmatic, but above all, believe that you are free to choose the thoughts you believe in. Believe that you are the architect of your experience, not its victim. Choose the path of discretion by choosing the thought that you want to be true. Practice these 3 steps every time you experience emotions or feelings that you do not find pleasant and that you want to change. I guarantee that if you persist, you will begin to find work, life, and leadership a whole lot easier and pleasant. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this: notice, allow, choose. One important caveat: this process is not a substitute for taking action. If you're feeling too hot, open a window. Check the comments for the bonus process, which all masters of emotion use. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, leave me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more. See you in the next video.